to ask herself, what am I still living for? The airport buzzed with energy, but Eleanor felt strangely out of place. In the rush of travelers, she was like a quiet brushstroke on a brightly colored canvas. Young people hurried with suitcases, couples held hands. She sat still in the waiting area, one hand resting on an old leather bag, eyes fixed on the window reflecting the pale gray sky. Eleanor wasn't afraid of being alone. What she wasn't prepared for was the feeling of being invisible, as if, since her husband's passing, no one had really seen her, not with their eyes, but with their presence. The flight to Kenya was over 10 hours. During the journey, Eleanor read an old novel, sipped juice, and nodded politely at the strangers beside her. She still carried her signature grace, silver hair neatly pinned up, a crisp white blouse, and calm, observant eyes. But inside there was a faint tapping, like a silver spoon on fine porcelain, reminding her she hadn't truly let go. When she landed in Africa, Eleanor wasn't expecting anything miraculous. She just wanted to feel new again, if only for a moment. And it was in that moment, free of expectation, that everything quietly began. In the soft afternoon sunlight of Nairobi, the breeze drifting through palm trees and birds calling in the distance, Eleanor stood waiting for her luggage, her silk scarf fluttering gently. There was a stillness to her posture, as if she belonged to this place, even though she had just arrived. And then a warm voice spoke beside her. "Do you need help with that suitcase?" A tall man with bright eyes and a calm presence asked in polished English, laced with a trace of African cadence. Eleanor turned, surprised by his presence, not because he was young, but because in his eyes was something rare. He saw her. Eleanor gave a soft smile and nodded. "Thank you. I don't think I'll turn down a bit of kindness." The next morning, Eleanor woke earlier than usual. The Nairobi sky was painted in a soft orange hue, gentle like a greeting from a faraway land to someone learning how to open her heart again. She made her way down to the hotel lobby, holding a small notebook and the old camera her husband had once cherished. Today would be her first ever safari. The Jeep arrived right on time. It was beige, lightly coated in dust, a quiet testament to the many journeys it had seen before. The driver stepped out, young, tall, with bright, friendly eyes. He offered a polite nod. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Elijah, your guide for the day," he said, his voice deep and calm, with a softness that seemed born from years spent close to nature. Eleanor gave a slight nod. "I'm Eleanor. It's lovely to meet you." Elijah helped her into the vehicle, then turned to assist the other passengers, a couple from Italy, a family from Japan, and a photographer from Canada. The ride was peaceful, quiet, filled only with the sound of cameras clicking and tires rolling over red earth. But even in the group, Elijah instinctively kept an eye on Eleanor. While the others snapped photos of antelope darting across the horizon, he quietly approached her. "Have you ever been to Africa before?" he asked, his tone not prying, just genuinely open. "Never," Eleanor replied, her voice steadying despite the slight tremble. "My husband always wanted to come, but we never got the chance." Elijah was silent for a moment, then looked out toward the horizon. "I lost my father when I was very young. My mother used to say that some people, even when they're no longer here, still walk beside us every step of the way. Maybe you're still traveling with him, just in a different way." The words caught Eleanor off guard, not because they were profound, but because they came from someone so young in such an ordinary moment. She smiled softly and nodded. "Maybe you're right." That afternoon, when the group stopped to rest at a small camp in the middle of the savannah, Elijah led Eleanor to a raised mound overlooking the plains. The sky had turned the color of golden honey, and giraffes ambled quietly near the trees. "This is where I come when I need quiet," Elijah said. "I thought you might like it." Eleanor stood still, taking in the view. For a moment, it felt like she had stepped into another world. No phone calls, no schedules, no empty chairs at the dinner table, just wind and the feeling of truly breathing again. "Thank you, Elijah," she said softly. "I don't know why, but I feel lighter." Elijah didn't reply. He simply nodded, then sat beside her, both of them silently watching the sun set. Back at camp, Elijah gently asked, "Would you like to have dinner outside with me and a few from the group? If you're not comfortable, I completely understand." Eleanor hesitated. Years of caution made her want to say no, but when she looked at his face, open, sincere, without pressure, she nodded. As long as I can sit near the fire, I always get cold when the sun goes down. Elijah laughed. I'll save you the best seat, closest to the flames. That night, Eleanor sat by the fire, talking with Elijah in a circle of strangers who somehow felt familiar. Her laughter rang out lightly, carrying something both old and new, like a beloved blanket freshly washed and scented once more. And in her heart, a small green shoot began to rise. The third afternoon at the reserve passed in an unhurried rhythm, as if everything was breathing in time with the wind and light. Eleanor sat alone under the wooden awning, a cup of tea gone cold in her hand. In the distance, the sunset began to wash the trees in gold, and birdsong echoed like the soundtrack of an old memory. Elijah approached, carrying a folding chair and a small wooden box. I thought you might enjoy tonight's sunset. The sky's just clear enough and the breeze feels like a gentle hello, he said softly, as if asking permission to enter a space he wasn't sure he was welcome in. Eleanor smiled. You always seem to know when to appear. Elijah sat beside her, keeping a polite distance. The wooden box he brought held a small tea set, and soon the scent of hot mint leaves drifted through the air. Nothing better for conversation than a late afternoon cup of tea, he said. Eleanor took a sip, then set the cup down, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. Elijah, she began, her voice low, do you ever feel like you're living two lives? One everyone sees and one only you know? Elijah was silent for a long moment. Yes, he said. One for the job, the smiles, the stories, and one I carry inside. Memories, pain, the things no one asks about. Eleanor turned to look at him. In the fading light, his face looked both young and weathered. I used to think loneliness was the worst thing, but then I realized the worst is having no one you want to share anything with. He nodded, not answering right away. Instead, he poured more tea for both of them. I don't know what you're carrying, Elijah said gently, but I do know the feeling when everything inside you becomes so quiet, it's like even your own voice starts to fade. That stopped Eleanor, not just because of the empathy in his words, but because he had named something she had never spoken aloud. They sat together in silence for a long time, not the awkward kind, but the rare kind where two people don't try to fill space, but simply share it. Night fell slowly. Elijah lifted a hand and pointed to the stars beginning to rise over the horizon. When I was a kid, my father used to say, you don't get to choose your star, but you can choose where to stand and look at it. He smiled softly. Maybe that's all we really need. A place to be still, a moment to breathe. Eleanor turned to him, her gaze now gentler. And sometimes all we really need is someone willing to sit beside us without needing to say too much. Elijah didn't speak. He just looked into her eyes and nodded. In that moment, Eleanor no longer felt like an older woman lost on a distant trip. She was simply a human being, with layers of emotion, old wounds, and something fragile within her that had just been touched, without judgment. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. The next day, the sky shifted earlier than usual. Thick clouds rolled in from the distance, signaling that a heavy rain would soon wash over the vast plains. Eleanor stood beneath the camp's awning, her eyes tracing the wind as it swept across the grasslands, now beginning to turn with the season. We'll have to postpone this afternoon's drive, Elijah said behind her, his voice tinged with a touch of regret, but also a quiet relief. Eleanor turned. Maybe the sky just wants us to rest for a while. An hour later, the rain began to fall, steady and heavy. The camp settled into an unusual stillness, as if even nature had slowed its breathing. Elijah appeared with 2 steaming cups of ginger tea, tapping gently on the doorframe like a quiet invitation. No sunset tonight, he said with a smile, but I figured you wouldn't say no to a conversation in the rain. Eleanor invited him into her spacious tent. They sat across from each other on simple wooden chairs, the soft glow of an oil lamp warming the space. The sound of rain on canvas above was steady, soothing, like a lullaby for the soul. You've spoken about your father, Eleanor began, but you've never mentioned your mother. Elijah smiled lightly without avoidance. She passed when I was very young. Sometimes I wonder if the memories I have are truly mine or just pieces from other stories. But one thing I remember clearly, her hands. I may have forgotten her face, but I still remember the feeling of her holding my hand when I was scared. Eleanor felt a weight settle gently in her chest. Maybe emotion is the only thing we hold on to longer than memory, she said softly. Elijah looked at her, his expression no longer boyish and open, but thoughtful, grounded. What about you? Is there something you've never said out loud but carry with you every day? Eleanor looked out the opening of the tent. The rain still fell. I used to be very good at enduring, she began, her voice steady but heavy. I thought being strong meant getting through loss without burdening anyone, but I came to realize no one knew I was hurting because I'd become too good at hiding it. Elijah didn't respond. He simply rested his hand on the edge of the table, close but not quite touching hers. A quiet gesture, one that made Eleanor feel seen without pressure. When I lost my husband, I didn't just lose a person. I lost a role. I lost the things that made me feel like I mattered, she continued. Everyone thought I was fine because I didn't cry much, because I kept living. But some pain doesn't come out as tears. It just sits there, quietly, draining the life out of you. Elijah bowed his head slightly, his voice low. Sometimes I think the ones who stay silent the longest are the ones who need to be asked the most. The words felt like a key turning in a lock somewhere deep within Eleanor. She smiled. This time, a real smile. You always know what to say, Elijah. Not always, he replied. But I'm learning. Because of you. Outside, the rain softened, tapering off into a peaceful hush. Inside the tent, the small space held two people. Not bound, not promised, just two hearts, quietly finding rhythm again in the stillness, where no one had reached for so long. The next morning, when Eleanor woke, the rain had stopped. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a thin line of light across the tent roof, gently gilding the dark threads of her earth-toned wool blanket. She sat up, still for a few seconds, then reached for the scarf at the foot of the bed and wrapped it softly around her shoulders. Outside, the air had noticeably softened after the night's storm. The ground was still damp, the leaves still holding drops of water, but the whole camp felt freshly rinsed of some quiet fatigue. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, and there, as if no invitation had been needed, Elijah was already waiting, a wooden cup beside him, steam curling into the cool air. Morning ginger lemon tea, he said when he saw her step out. You once told me on a cold morning, all you need is warmth and a little citrus. Eleanor let out a soft laugh, unable to hide her surprise. You remember details. I have a good memory when it matters, Elijah replied, his gaze as gentle as it had been the day before. They sat together for a long while, saying nothing, letting the early wind tease through their hair and the smell of rain-kissed earth thread into memory. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the cup. She could feel something shifting inside her, not quite love, not clearly joy, but something that felt alive again. A sense of being seen through someone else's eyes. Elijah, she said after a long pause, I'm not sure what this feeling is. It doesn't feel like anything I've known before. He didn't rush to answer. I'm not sure either, but I don't think every connection needs a name. Eleanor nodded slowly. It's just, I'm afraid I might be dreaming too late in life. And Elijah said softly, I'm just afraid we'll miss something good, simply because we're too busy worrying whether it makes sense. A breeze passed, lifting the corner of Eleanor's scarf. She turned to look at Elijah, the young man from a different world, many years her junior, yet looking at her as if she were a story his grandfather once told, on windy nights by a creaking window. Eleanor set her cup down and let out a long breath. Maybe we just let it be. No pressure, no promises, no labels, just two people who've lived through loss, learning how to listen to their hearts again. Elijah smiled, nodding slowly. I couldn't ask for more. They rose and walked slowly along the narrow trail leading to the open land behind the camp. Where the sun was climbing, draping golden light over the dry bushes, nothing was loud, nothing hurried, just a quiet morning, where two people, each carrying their own private loneliness, began taking their first steps side by side. not to fill the emptiness, but to listen together. And sometimes, as Eleanor was beginning to understand, the most magical part of a love story isn't found in perfection. It's found in the moment you allow someone to step into a space you've long walked alone. A week later, Eleanor stood in front of her small home in Oxfordshire, her hands still holding the lingering warmth of her last handshake with Elijah. She turned to watch the taxi round the corner, carrying with it the quiet echo of a journey that had changed something deep within her, subtly, without fanfare, but permanently. The house was just as quiet as before. The lilac vines still climbed the steps, the thin layer of dust still coated the desk where she used to sit for hours. But something in the way Eleanor stepped inside had changed. Lighter, calmer, as if she herself was no longer the same woman who had locked this door before her trip. She made a pot of tea and settled into her old armchair by the window, looking out at the back garden, the one that had once been her entire world after her husband passed. Now it was no longer a place of retreat. It was simply a part of a larger life she was learning to embrace again. That afternoon, Eleanor opened her laptop and began writing a long letter to Emily. Not the short, practical updates of the past, but a real story. My dear, the trip to Kenya was nothing like I expected. It wasn't just the elephants crossing the savannah in silence, or the golden sunrises over red soil. I met someone who helped me hear myself again. A thoughtful young man with a different story, who reminded me that courage isn't only about how far we travel, but about allowing ourselves to feel again. There was nothing romantic, only an honest connection that reminded me to feel or asked me to abandon who I am. But some connections, once in a lifetime, allow us to let go of fear and hold on to gratitude. Elijah was simply there as a true friend. And sometimes that's enough. I no longer feel like a shadow in this house. I found something I thought I'd lost: curiosity, presence in each moment, and the belief that age is not the end of the heart. She ended the letter with a simple message. Live, my dear. Not by the book, but in a way that lets your heart breathe. The next day, she began rearranging the living room, throwing open the windows that had stayed closed for too long. She called the calligraphy class she once postponed, thinking no one values handwriting anymore. She sent in a volunteer application to the local community center, and that afternoon, instead of having tea alone, she walked to the little cafe on the corner where young people and the elderly shared books, coffee, and sometimes just a glance. Elijah hadn't reached out, and Eleanor didn't expect him to. She understood some people come into our lives not to stay forever, but to remind us we are still capable of feeling something deeply. And because of that, we are still alive. Before bed, Eleanor picked up her phone. On the screen, a quiet message from an international number waited. I hope you've kept the scarf I left. It's getting cold here, too. I'm working on launching my first company. When I'm ready, I hope I can send you an invitation. Not as a guide, but as a friend. Elijah. Eleanor smiled. She set the phone down, lit a small candle beside her desk, and pulled the scarf from her suitcase. It still held the scent of the savannah wind, campfire smoke, and the warmth of a beautiful memory. It's never too late to begin again, not by returning to who you were, but by becoming the person you now understand you want to be. We'd love to hear your thoughts after following Eleanor in Elijah's story. Have you ever taken a journey that made you see yourself in a completely new light? Or met a stranger who reminded you that you're still capable of feeling, of beginning again? Share your reflections in the comments below. What do you think matters most in healing after loss? A trip, a conversation, or simply being heard? We read every comment, and we truly look forward to hearing your story.